Okay, let's unpack this. We've got a fascinating deep dive ahead of us today, really digging into this detailed look at mentoring and what it truly means to make disciples based on some material shared with us.
Yeah, and what's really striking here is how this source just immediately cuts to the core. It argues pretty strongly that this isn't just about passing on information, not at all.
Right.
It makes a compelling case, really, for why a lot of the conventional ways we approach this kind of fall short. It seems they miss these fundamental things: actual life change, a deep relationship, and this is key, reproduction.
That really resonates. So maybe you're listening and thinking about being a mentor, but perhaps you're looking for one yourself, or maybe you're just curious about what, genuinely transformative growth even looks like. What does this deep dive uncover for you?
We're definitely going to explore that critical difference between just knowing something in your head and actually truly living it out.
And why these deep personal relationships are, well, non-negotiable, according to this source.
Exactly. And maybe surprisingly, why dealing with conflict the right way is actually pretty central to this whole thing working.
So our mission then, in this deep dive, is to kind of wrestle with this materials perspective. We want to understand its distinction between mentoring, teaching, coaching. Identify the essential ingredients it lays out for these effective mentoring relationships.
And really see why it presents this specific approach as, well, absolutely crucial for sustained growth and leadership development.
Okay, let me ask you this. Have you ever been in that spot where you learned something really important, maybe a new skill, or a principle you totally understood it intellectually, but then actually doing it consistently? That was the struggle.
Oh, absolutely. Happens all the time.
Well, this deep dive suggests that the missing piece might just be the kind of relational dynamic it's describing here. So let's jump right into it.
Okay. So the material kicks off with a really powerful, almost kind of stark anecdote. It tells this story about a leader, someone working in a really challenging environment. A hugely capable guy, apparently, received all the technical knowledge, how to start groups, how to make disciples, all the methods. And for a while, he saw incredible results, like groups multiplying, real momentum building.
Sounds great initially, but I sense a but coming.
Yeah, but then it all just came crashing down. And when they looked into why, they found he'd been, well, using his position improperly in multiple groups, a complete betrayal of trust that just devastated the work in that whole area.
Wow.
And the punchline from this source, it's delivered right up front. They gave him the knowledge, sure, and he could do the tasks for a bit, but knowledge transfer, it's explicitly stated, it is not the same thing as true disciple making or mentoring. That's the core problem it's tackling.
So it's highlighting this huge gap, really, between knowing and actually being. It contrasts what it sees as pretty common approaches, often focused on education, information, knowing scripture, knowing facts,
with what it defines as true disciple making, which, from this perspective, is fundamentally about a relationship with Jesus that profoundly transforms not just your thinking, but your heart and your behavior.
Okay, heart and behaviors.
And critically, it says this requires genuine, intentional relationships between believers, particularly mature believers investing deeply in newer ones.
Okay, so that's the difference between, say, knowledge, just having the information, and wisdom.
Yeah.
Wisdom, as this material frames it, is actually using what you know to do what's right.
Precisely. Knowledge is necessary. You can't have wisdom without it, but it offers absolutely zero guarantee you'll actually apply it wisely.
Makes sense.
And that's where the relationship becomes, well, non-negotiable. New believers, or even folks just starting to go deeper, they need that consistent, lived-out influence of mature disciples. They need relationships where, honestly, any area of life is open for discussion: family, work, struggles, failures, sin, the whole thing. It's through wrestling with life together in these relationships, the source argues, that wisdom starts to actually take root and replace just, accumulated head knowledge.
You have to see it modeled, right?
Yeah.
This source really stresses that true mentoring needs personal contact. You need to see the words put into action, not just hear them in a classroom or something.
Exactly. Without seeing how belief is lived out in the, let's be honest, messiness of daily life, it argues it just stays a teacher-student thing.
Yeah.
Which is great for knowledge transfer, sure, but it's not this idea of true mentoring or disciple-making.
And the scope they lay out for this kind of mentoring relationship. Wow. It's incredibly comprehensive.
Yeah, it's like no area of life is off limits. They actually list things. Our relationship with God, obviously, but also with our family, with our community, our church, our calling or work, and even our relationship with ourselves, our mental, spiritual, emotional, physical well-being. It covers everything.
That's basically everything you could possibly navigate in life.
It is. And they point out it's supposed to be a profoundly mutual benefit. Kind of win-win.
How so?
Well, the mentees obviously gain. They get examples, they get wise counsel from someone who's maybe walked that path before, they get accountability. But the mentors themselves, these more mature believers, they're challenged too. They have to articulate their faith, they're spurred to deeper levels of wisdom as they help others apply it, and frankly, they're held accountable just by having someone observing their life up close.
Okay, that makes sense. So the flip side, what happens when this kind of relational mentoring is missing? According to this material, the consequences sound pretty significant.
Yeah, they describe it as a real problem, even a potential disaster for communities and churches. New believers, they lack examples, they lack wise counsel, they lack accountability. And the mature believers, they risk just stagnating because they're not actively pouring their lives into others. It becomes a lose-lose situation. And the principle advocated here is actually quite challenging. Ideally, it says believers should simultaneously be investing in others, mentoring them, while also continuing to be mentored themselves.
Constantly learning and giving.
Right. And they note that over time, these relationships naturally mature. They can transition from a very clear mentor-mentee dynamic to more of a peer relationship, where the learning and mutual challenge just flow both ways.
That feels organic. And this whole idea of learning through imitation, through that life-on-life connection, it's not exactly new in a faith context, is it? The source mentions some classic scripture references.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It points to several to underscore this historical emphasis. Like, James saying, don't just hear the word, you got to do what it says.
Right, the doers of the word.
Exactly. And Paul telling believers to imitate me, my way of life, or how the Thessalonians were commended because they became imitators of us. You know how we lived among you. Even Hebrews encourages people to consider the outcome of their leaders' lives and imitate their faith. It's consistently presented as living out beliefs visibly, tangibly, not just holding them intellectually in your head.
Which leads us to a really critical, maybe even uncomfortable point the source makes. The heart of the mentor, where it all has to start.
Yeah, this is big. The source uses a very strong term, calling the critique of the Pharisees back in Matthew 23 the single greatest indictment of religious leadership ever.
Wow. And the core problem identified there.
Devastatingly simple. They didn't practice what they preached. There was this glaring inconsistency between their public image and their private lives.
And the list of their failures provided in the source, it's quite a read. Things like practicing hypocrisy, putting heavy burdens on people without lifting a finger to help.
Acting purely for show, for their own reputation, effectively shutting people out of the kingdom, and tragically, making converts who ended up worse off than they were before.
That's damning.
It is. They're described as forgetting the source of their authority, focusing on tiny rules while totally neglecting the big things. Justice, mercy, faithfulness, they were like, whitewashed tombs looking good on the outside, but inwardly full of decay. Just dangerous. A brood of vipers, as it says.
And this source doesn't pull any punches here, does it? It states really clearly that these same warnings apply directly to leaders today. That sin of hypocrisy, of inconsistency, it's frighteningly easy to slip into.
It really is. So what this material suggests is that true mentoring isn't built primarily on how much you know or even how skilled you are necessarily. It's built on the state of your heart.
Okay.
It's shaped by your own journey, your own experiences, including your failures and your repentance. It's about what you actively avoid now because of those hard lessons and how you genuinely relate to God and to others, both when people are watching and when they're not.
So a mentor, from this perspective, there's someone striving for authenticity. Their deepest motivation is a genuine desire to know God and to serve people.
Exactly. They aim for consistency. What you see is hopefully pretty close to what you get because their life as a, quote, redeemed sinner is being lived out transparently, warts and all, not just talked about in theory.
And a really important point here seems to be that it's not about being perfect or having all the answers.
Definitely not. It's about striving towards growth through grace and being a learner yourself. Being willing to share the difficult, hard-earned lessons so maybe others can avoid some of the same pitfalls. It's about applying wisdom not primarily for your own advancement, but really for the benefit of others.
So if you want to step into this kind of mentoring role, It requires starting with yourself. It means as you learn, maybe stumble, repent, get back up.
Yeah.
You bring others along on that journey with you.
Yeah. It means intentionally intertwining your life with theirs, making conscious choices to do what's right in each moment, each relationship, and sharing your actual lived experience for mutual growth, and ultimately serving a bigger purpose together.
This deeply personal dimension connects directly to what the material calls mentoring values, right? These aren't just things you list on a website.
No, not at all. They are your default settings, the ingrained positions you operate from without having to think too hard, especially when you're under pressure.
Ah, the stress test. That's when your real defaults show up, isn't it? The source argues that while we might want some slack when things get tough, that's precisely when our core values are most clearly revealed.
It is. And there's a fantastic little anecdote in the source about the author's own journey early on. His mentor was helping him work on his language specifically, cursing.
Okay.
He managed to stop the outward behavior, clean up the words, but his mentor pressed him, what about the thoughts behind it? The anger, the frustration. True change wasn't just about stopping the words. It required an adjustment in his underlying values, his core way of thinking. And later, under real pressure in a difficult situation, he found his thoughts automatically went to what was best for the other person involved. It was this clear shift from self-focus to other focus. That showed a real core value adjustment.
Wow, that's a powerful picture of a core value genuinely changing. It really highlights that inward focus the source connects to, referencing passages like Philippians 3, where Paul talks about counting everything as loss for the sake of knowing Christ and, pressing on towards the goal. That internal striving that a mentor helps guide.
And that's where the core distinction comes in, according to this material. Mentors focus on the person. Their goal is to help that individual adjust their core values and behaviors across every area of their life towards a desired standard, like becoming more like Christ.
Okay, and this is how they draw the lines between different roles.
Exactly. If your primary focus is the job someone's doing or the skills needed for a specific task, you're probably acting more like a coach. If your main focus is transferring knowledge or information, you're a teacher.
Both valuable but different.
Right. Mentoring might include elements of teaching and coaching, absolutely, but its fundamental focus, its heartbeat, is the holistic development of the person.
The source points to that passage in Ephesians chapters 4 and 5 as a kind of scriptural model for this comprehensive personal transformation.
Right.
Putting off the old ways, putting on the new.
Yeah, covering everything from how you speak to your relationships to your attitudes. It's that kind of deep-seated change that mentors are meant to walk alongside mentees through.
So, achieving this level of deep, life-altering impact, it clearly requires investing your life into someone else's.
Yeah.
Way beyond just a scheduled meeting or a group seminar. It's that life-on-life concept again.
Absolutely. And what's the ultimate payoff? The goal of all this deep relational investment. From this perspective, it's crystal clear. The development of the mentee into a disciple maker themselves, a leader maker.
That sounds incredibly intentional. And the source adds an interesting twist here. The act of mentoring is also crucial for the mentor's own growth.
It really is. You solidify your own understanding, your own skills, most effectively when you actually have to teach and train someone else in them. Guiding others inherently expands your own leadership capacity.
Which leads to a very firm rule this material advocates for those in mentoring relationships.
Yeah, this one might surprise people. It says the mentees must be actively mentoring others, or the mentor should actually discontinue spending time mentoring them.
Wow, that sounds pretty strict. Does the source explain why they take such a firm stance on that?
They do. They basically view relationships that aren't reproducing, aren't multiplying as a major drain, like a primary attack that wastes valuable leader time and energy without actually furthering the overall mission or fostering real growth.
So be discerning with your time.
Exactly. They urge mentors to be wise and invest their time primarily where it will yield this kind of reproductive growth. Leaders making leaders.
So the relationship itself is expected to evolve over time. It's not
Oh, absolutely not. It starts typically with the mentor doing most of the teaching and training. Then, as the mentee gains competence and confidence, they begin teaching and training others. The source even suggests skills aren't truly mastered until you can teach them and apply them through training someone else. Interesting. And ideally, that initial mentor-mentee dynamic starts to shift. Over time, it becomes more of a coworker or peer relationship.
How long does that usually take?
The source suggests this transition can happen relatively quickly, maybe even within a year in some cases, but more commonly it takes something like 3 to 5 years.
Okay. And they offer a pretty stark benchmark too, don't they?
They do. If a relationship stays stuck in that rigid mentor-mentee structure for more than 5 years, something's likely wrong. Often, it indicates the mentee isn't reproducing, which suggests the mentor, maybe inadvertently, created a student who just depends on them, rather than a leader who reproduces themselves. Because, as they keep stressing, leaders make leaders.
That's a really challenging self-evaluation for anyone mentoring. The source provides several questions for mentors to ask themselves, right? To see if they're actually making leaders.
Yeah, things like, is there a clear mutual agreement about this? Are we actually addressing all areas of life, or just sticking to safe topics? Is the mentee actively mentoring others, and do I even know who their mentees are? Am I learning from my mentee too? Is there mutual success and shared goals? Is the relationship itself changing and maturing?
And that big one, have I made students or leaders?
Exactly. They emphasize that this kind of honest assessment requires real intentionality and, well, they use the phrase brutal self-evaluation. You have to be willing to look hard at the results.
The example they share from Africa really seems to illustrate this principle in action, a movement there plateaued.
Right, because the leaders had received excellent training, they had the knowledge, the skills, but they hadn't been mentored in a way that really increased their personal capacity and drove reproduction.
So what changed?
When leaders started being intentionally mentored and helped to mentor others down the line, that led to renewed growth and actually sustained the movement long term. Just transferring knowledge wasn't enough to keep it going.
Wow, okay. And when you're investing lives into lives like this, sharing everything across all these areas, one thing the source is really clear about is that conflict isn't just possible, it's basically inevitable.
Yeah, they frame conflict not as some sign of failure, but simply as a normal part of human interaction. We're all imperfect, right? We make mistakes, poor choices happen. The absolute key is how it's handled.
And how a mentor navigates that conflict. It defines their character, shapes their growth as a leader.
And it's essential for the relationship to actually deepen. Mishandling conflict, that erodes trust, maybe destroys it. Handling it appropriately, that builds trust and actually allows for more meaningful connection down the road.
This source provides a pretty extensive and, frankly, maybe uncomfortable list of inappropriate ways people often deal with conflict. A lot of them feel pretty familiar.
Oh, yeah. Things like just ignoring the problem, hoping it goes away. Disrespecting the other person, complaining to everyone else except the person involved, delaying dealing with it, being indirect or passive-aggressive.
Shouting matches, resorting to personal attacks instead of focusing on the issue. Physical actions, obviously. Criticizing instead of offering constructive feedback. Trying to score points or win the argument.
Talking just to avoid listening. Building alliances against the other person, dragging up stuff from the past, using those absolute statements like, you always, or you never, threatening body language, abusive language.
Oh, and a big one they mention, using text or email for sensitive problems. They explicitly warn against that.
Yeah, absolutely. They even dissect common phrases people use, like they analyze, he threw me under the bus. They point out how that's violent language, it assigns negative motives without proof, it suggests the damage is irreparable, and it basically invites retaliation. It's seen as a fundamentally destructive way to frame a conflict.
And high emotion gets highlighted as particularly counterproductive, right?
Definitely. It just shuts down listening. It leads to bad decisions, bad behavior. It's part of fighting, not problem solving.
Okay, so that's the don't list. What are the appropriate ways to handle emotion and conflict, according to this material? Where do you start?
It starts internally, managing yourself first.
Okay, like what?
First, own your emotion. Identify exactly what you're feeling, anger, frustration, hurt, fear, whatever it is, and just accept it. Acknowledge it.
Yeah.
They note that different personalities might approach this differently, thinkers versus feelers, but everyone needs the discipline to process their own feelings before reacting or confronting.
Makes sense. Then what?
Next, they strongly advise asking help me to understand questions. And crucially, do not assume or assign motives. Don't jump to conclusions about why someone did something.
That little anecdote they share is great for this point.
Oh, the one about the high beams. Yeah, it's perfect. Driving late at night, car behind has blinding high beams on, immediately assume hostile intent, get angry, prepare for confrontation, only to find out it's a sweet little old lady whose lights are just stuck on high.
Right. It's such a vivid example of how assuming motives is just dangerous and often completely wrong.
Totally. They also suggest talking the problem through first with a trusted ally, someone who will keep it strictly confidential, or maybe even a professional counselor, before you talk to the person you're actually in conflict with. This helps you process your own stuff, your own feelings, your own contribution to the situation.
Get some perspective before you engage.
Exactly. Then, when you do address the person directly, state your problem clearly and calmly. But also be aware of their emotional state. Be willing to give them time to process if they need it. You might even ask, do you need a break? Or suggest talking later if emotions are clearly running too high on either side.
Because the goal is resolution, not escalation.
Right. They offer that simple core principle: cool heads solve problems, hot heads cause problems.
And when you are giving feedback about your own feelings, use those I statements.
Yes. I feel frustrated because, rather than the blaming, you made me feel frustrated, and try to reflect back what you hear about the other person's emotions. Okay, I understand you're feeling angry about this situation. Shows you're listening.
Now, the source has a strong warning about well-meaning third parties jumping in to defend someone in a disagreement. Why is that discouraged?
Their perspective is that it actually hinders the individual's growth as a leader. People need to learn how to navigate and resolve their own conflicts. A third party can definitely help someone debrief the situation later, analyze it, learn from it. That's valuable. But they shouldn't jump into the middle of the actual fight. Let the individuals involved work it out.
Okay. And the focus needs to shift from the past to the future.
Yeah, that's key. The mistakes happened, okay? Solutions are always forward-looking. Accountability and problem-solving are about what happens next. So state the problem clearly, simply, without dredging up ancient history or excessive detail. Focus on moving forward.
And good communication during the conflict itself.
Defined as being honest, open, and direct, but always delivered in a gracious and respectful way. It means genuinely listening, really allowing the other person to speak fully without interruption, asking clarifying questions to make sure you understand correctly, and ensuring you are both truly on the same page about what the issue actually is.
And the source warns powerfully against trying to win the argument, right? Or prove you're right.
Absolutely. Because you might win that point in the moment, but you will likely lose the relationship, or at least damage it significantly. Good communication, even and especially in conflict, builds trust. And trust is absolutely essential for resolving problems constructively.
Makes sense. And finally, the source points to a list of relational passages in the Bible at the end.
Yeah, suggesting they contain foundational principles that should guide how we interact appropriately and navigate conflict in a way that actually honors the relationships involved.
Okay, so wrapping up the core insights from this really rich deep dive into the source material. True mentoring, from this perspective, it's a profoundly relational process. It goes way beyond just teaching or coaching.
Right. It's about transformative investment in the whole person, impacting every single area of their life with the ultimate kind of non-negotiable goal of reproducing that capacity in them so they become mentors, become reproducers themselves.
And it requires significant intentionality, real vulnerability from both sides.
Yeah.
And it absolutely has to start with the mentor's own journey, their own consistency, their own growth, their willingness to learn, stumble, and get back up again.
Couldn't say it better.
So whether you're listening and personally seeking deeper transformation, or you're aiming to effectively help others grow, or maybe you're striving to build effective leadership capacity around you, understanding this comprehensive, deeply relational view of mentoring, including that challenging but essential skill of navigating conflict appropriately, seems absolutely fundamental according to this source material.
Yeah, it really does. And maybe here's a final provocative thought for you to consider, building on that idea that our core values are most clearly revealed when we're under stress. If this deep dive suggests that true mentoring is about helping others adjust their core values and consistently live out what they know, and if those core values really show up when the pressure is on, maybe take a moment to consider. What might your own responses in challenging, stressful situations reveal about the core values you're currently operating from, and perhaps inadvertently transmitting to those you interact with or lead? Something to chew on.